Welcome to another edition of Interview with the Author. I'm John from shocksolas.ie, and I'm pleased to be joined by Laurence Graham today. Hello, Laurence. How are you doing?
John, how are you? Nice to be with you this morning.
Very good, very good. And we're talking, Laurence, today about your new book, which is being launched next Wednesday, and this is Hope from the Margins. So yeah, so just maybe for our watchers and our listeners first, I know you actually from Kerry. You were head of a church there, the Methodist Church in Killarney, for quite a while. So we had a few times we met each other over the years in Killarney. You're currently in Dublin. Well, maybe if you can give us a brief outline maybe of a bit of your testimonial. And I know that you've spent some time in Haiti as well. Just kind of a quick overview for people maybe that don't know you, Laurence.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, John. Yeah, well, I grew up in a Christian home. I have to say that because my dad was a Methodist minister, but genuinely grew up in a Christian home. But of course, God has no grandchildren, and so it had to become my personal faith, and that's what happened. We lived at the time in Portrush. Moved around a lot in my childhood because my dad got moved. So, first place I remember is Burr, County Offaly, despite this northern accent. And then we were in Donegal for a while. And then my teenage years were really in the north, as the accent that has stuck. We were 5 years in Portrush, right up on the north coast, and 5 years on the edge of Belfast. But it was in Portrush. I was about 12, going to CSSM, the Scripture Union Beach Mission thing that always was very active in Portrush, and I was going to the talks. And I remember one day just realizing I had to. I wanted to ask Jesus to be my Lord and Savior personally, and went home and said to my dad, and he said, yeah, he didn't push me out. He said, yeah, well, think it carefully, almost like not putting me off, but just think. Went the next day. It was a Thursday, and I went to see the speaker after this, and I just want to become a Christian, says I, and that's what happened. But then I was about 12, didn't really grow much. But then when I was about 14, we moved to Belfast, to a big, large church with a lot of young people, and I realized here was these Christian young people had something I didn't, and then I had the great privilege from about 14 to 18 of being in a place where I was amongst other Christian young people and really formed in faith and really grew in faith and in ministry. And that's when my call began. Definitely never a call, not a call, certainly to the Methodist ministry. And I remember saying that to my dad, and he entirely agreed, because it obviously wasn't for me, and I obviously wasn't for it. But I sensed a call to agriculture. I went and studied agriculture in Reading University, and my reason for doing that was an increasing burden about the developing world. Why should I be fat while others are hungry, basically? And so I did the agriculture, and then went through the Methodist Church to Haiti, where I worked as an agriculturalist in development work. But the call to ministry was all even beginning to stir. Then I thought I'd be doing the same thing for a lifetime, to be honest, at that stage. But in Haiti, I began just to become a lay preacher. The first sermons I ever preached were in Haitian Creole, not English. And in fact, the people in Killarney used to regularly tell me I should be better to keep preaching in Creole, they'd understand me more. But the call to ministry just began then. Then I was evacuated out of Haiti because of coups d'etats and various civil unrest. I ended up for 10 months in Antigua. Less agriculture to do there, and had more opportunity for church work, and I was in youth work and preaching every week. And so I came back home, and I ended up back in Belfast for 5 years, working for 2 years as a lay pastor in a church, and then 3 years in the Methodist Training College, Edge Hill. In 1997, Karen and I were married, and I left college, and that's 25 years ago now. And all of my ordained ministry's been in the south. So Longford, Cork, Kerry, as you've mentioned, and now in Dublin Central Mission. So
yeah, it's interesting, Laurence, to hear about the way God moved in your life, and the way you were, agriculture, I guess, brought you to Haiti. But then while you were in Haiti, you started preaching, and I guess we all have our own story of how both we came to Christ, and then how God is working in our life. So that's very interesting that you went there for agriculture, but then God started stirring up some more things in you.
I
while you
think
were there?
God's call is never a one-off thing. It's not like, oh, I'm 18, I'm called to this, that's it.
Mm.
God's call is a daily thing, you know, and it can develop and change and grow in unexpected ways sometimes over the course of our lifetime.
That's it. And I guess this is something I've struggled sometimes with in regards trying to figure out, you know, we talk about, as we say, God's calling in our lives, and that we want to hear maybe an audible voice, do this, do that. But, you know, we have the Bible, and it's very clear in the Bible what we're called to do. And I guess your book kind of brings that in. It's titled Hope from the Margins, but we're really called to be missionaries. And sometimes that word, you know, people think missionary in Africa or maybe Haiti or Asia or someplace, but we can be a missionary every single day of our lives, just talking to a person on the street and just mentioning something from the Bible or talking to them. So I guess how did your book come about? Are you talking about this mission in the church?
I think kind of just coming back, just I get into the book now, but I think you're right. We're called to be missionaries, but I think even before that, our fundamental calling is to be with Jesus, is to know Jesus, is to walk with Jesus. And actually mission comes out of that. That's one of the things in the book. We'll see if you read the book of the early church period, the first chapter, second chapter, and then I draw it out modernly in the last chapter, that if people really meet Jesus, then they will share that. It's just because we want to share good news. If something good happens, you tell somebody. You know, so it's not even like we're called to be missionaries. We're called to be Christians. We're called to be people of Jesus, follow Jesus, walk with Jesus, get to know Jesus more. And as we do that, we will share him. do you know, that because we just will, by the way we live and by the way we talk, we just will share him if we know him, if we walk with him. So the book
people,
then,
sorry for cutting across you, Lawrence, and people will see that in your life as well, I guess. It's not only the words we speak, but it's in our actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're getting into the heart of the book. Here's the book, by the way. It's called Hope from the Margins, and it says the subtitle, Church History Informing Mission Today. That's the double cover. It's kind of the old movement and rising into the new and being reborn and so on. So what led me to write it? Well, 2/3 of the book are actually based on a PhD thesis, which I did very part-time, mostly during my time in Kerry, actually. It took about 8 or 10 years, I think, all told. It was very part-time because I was busy, you know. But it was that PhD was an historical analysis of the methods of mission of the early church, of actually how the early church did mission, you know, and what they did. And I'll say more about how that was structured in a minute. But the PhD was basically history, but could only point towards lessons for today at the end of it. But I believe that there was huge lessons for today from the early church. And so that was why I really wanted, even the minute the PhD was finished, I really wanted to see if there was some way of sharing this, because I felt there was a message here, you know. And then much later, a couple of years ago, Praxis began, and I know quite a few of the key people in Praxis because they're based in Dublin here, and I go to all the Praxis events, and I love what Praxis is all about. And then the Praxis Press gave me an opportunity. I asked and sent a proposal, and much to my surprise, they felt, yeah, we can work with this. But and then lockdown helped as well. The second lockdown was my chance to try and put it together. So 2/3 of the book, the first 4 chapters essentially are a popularization of the PhD thesis. And the chapters 5 and 6 then are the application of that for today in the Western world, and particularly in Ireland. And the last chapter really is reflections on mission in Ireland based on the early church history and based on my 25 years of ministry in different parts around the country, and lots of wee stories from Kerry in that That's last great, chapter, actually. Kerry and North Cork, and so there's but obviously not naming people, but there's lots of learning. Kerry taught me an awful lot about mission and about God and about church. And so there's lots of Kerry and North Cork and Cork City actually as well in chapters 5 and particularly chapter 6. And just to elaborate slightly on the church history section, the first 4 chapters, when I say early church, the first chapter is the methods of mission in the New Testament period. basically up to about 100 AD. How they actually did mission, how did it work? And then the second chapter is basically the next 200 years, so the 100s and the 200s, how they did mission. When the church during that period was basically a small, marginalized, sometimes persecuted minority, and yet it grew. And then the third chapter is the 300 years, the next 300 years, because in 312, the Roman emperor became a Christian, and that changed everything. Because within a century, it went from illegal to be a Christian to being illegal not to be a Christian. And state and law all became joined with church, and what we called Christendom really began. And then, therefore, the methods of mission of the church changed radically. And then the fourth chapter is that same period, the sort of the 300s, the 400s, the 500s, but outside of the Roman Empire. Where it was still a small marginalized people. So that's in the east into China, North Africa, India, and of course west to even as far as Ireland. So there's a bit of Irish church history, but it's all the time. It's not just describing the history, this book. It's analyzing the methods of mission, how they actually did mission during these different epochs. And then the key thesis of the church then, the key thesis of the book, is teased out in the 5th and 6th chapters. The Christendom which began after Constantine, the Roman emperor that became a Christian, that Christendom, that link between church and state, that sort of continued for about 1500 years until sometime yesterday, depending on where you are. In France, and maybe 50 years ago, England maybe 20 years ago, Ireland kind of, in the last decade or two, we've seen this huge change where as we know here in Ireland, the church was the absolute center of society. It was the center of every village. The Archbishop in Dublin had the ear of the Taoiseach. What the church said, people listened and obeyed often. And of course, we know that that's all completely changed now. And so rapidly, as Christians, we're finding ourselves back on the margins of society. We're rapidly becoming a small, marginalized community again within the wider society. But here's the thing. The last time the church was a small, marginalized community, the church grew rapidly in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And so the last third of this book is about trying to analyze how it grew then with a view to informing us for our mission today. Because we're a small, marginalized community again. But there's hope in that. That's why it's called Hope from the Margins. Because lots of people are saying, oh, the church isn't where it used to be. It's all gone to bits. Well, you know what? Last time the church was marginalized, the church grew and people's lives were changed. And really, that's the message of the book.
It's so great to hear you talk about it, Laurence. You're very passionate about it. I'm looking forward to reading the book myself. And it's nice to get the bit of history of the church, but also it's not only history, it's talking about what we can, do today, and specifically, how it's connected to Ireland. And, it is, I think, as the book says, hope. We always need to have hope, whatever situation we're in. And if we think we're marginalized at the moment as a church, we have our hope in Christ. That's what the Bible says.
And we're probably the church is getting smaller but stronger. And we serve a marginalized savior. You read the Gospels, like Jesus was always on the margins. He'd nothing that the power structures couldn't cope with him, and he wasn't really interested in them. He was on the work. He was meeting with people on the margins, and that's the calling of the church.
Yeah, that's so great. You mentioned it there when you were talking about Praxis Press. Could you tell people a bit more about Praxis Press? Because there's two other books as well, and they're kind of connected to your book as well.
They are, yeah. So there's Praxis and there's Praxis Press. So Praxis is really an informal gathering of people interested in mission in Ireland, and they have events, they have learning communities, they have conferences. It's just think tanks helping people stimulate and think about mission, local church mission, our local mission, wherever they happen to be. All around Ireland. And then Praxis Press was born out of that a few years ago. And this is the third book from Praxis Press. And the other two are on your website as well, John. So there's Down with This Sort of Thing by Fraser Hosford. There's Gloriously Ordinary by Ruth, Garvey-Williams and others. And now there's Hope from the Margins by myself. But we didn't really intend this, but looking at the three together, now that they're all out together, there's actually a real synergy about them, which really wasn't intended, but I think God had something to do with it. They're all about mission in Ireland. Down with this sort of thing is kind of cultural reflections on how Ireland has changed and how and the message the message that the church needs to convey, now that the church is in a very different place. Because for many people in Ireland associate the church with bad news. But down with this sort of thing just represents the good news as good news in an Irish context. And then Gloriously Ordinary, Ruth's book, is really learning from grassroots stories. It's really a catalogue of grassroots stories of mission all around Ireland and what we can learn from those about our posture as church. And then mine, as I've said, is lessons from the church history. And then I also have a bit of grassroots stories, but they're all grassroots stories linked with people I've met and stuff I've been involved with over the years. And so it's like three different angles almost, but they're all windows onto the same topic of mission in Ireland today.
That's great to hear, and we'll put links below to those three books as well. You can pre-order Laurence's book, and it's being launched next Wednesday. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's great to hear. And as we were talking about the books from Praxis Press, are there other titles you'd recommend as well? It's great to hear recommendations from the authors we have on here.
Yeah. Well, I noticed on your site you've got Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline. That's a classic book. It's not by any stretch a new book, but it's good stuff. It really is good stuff. And anything from I read it a long time ago, but I'm only just now beginning to discover a bit more of Richard Foster. I've just read another of his book called Streams of Living Water, which is a really good book and really helpful book. It talks about the different streams within Christianity, the Pentecostal stream, the evangelical stream, the sacramental stream, and it talks about how we all have bits of all of them, don't we? And it's really helpful book. And another book there that I read recently that you have up on site is John Mark Comer, or Comer, I'm not even sure how you pronounce him. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It's a great book. Of course, that phrase though comes from Dallas Willard. And over this last few years, I've been reading a lot of Dallas Willard. Now, just phenomenal stuff about our walk with God. It's not so much about mission, it's about that, what I said earlier, that the precursor to mission, the really meeting with Jesus and allow Jesus to change our life. But Dallas Willard was a philosophy lecturer, so it's kind of, it's not just bedtime reading Dallas Willard. You really have to, it's hard going. And John Mark Comer is one interpreter, if you like, of Dallas Willard. But I find really helpful when John Ortberg writes. John Ortberg Dallas Willard had a huge impact on John Ortberg, and in fact it was to John Ortberg that Dallas Willard originally said, "What you need to do is ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life." And I those of you in Kerry know me will know I need to hear that. But John Ortberg really popularizes Dallas Willard, or he writes in a way that's more understandable than Dallas Willard, to be truthful, for me anyway. So something like, there's a book called Soul Keeping, and an older one, The Life You've Always Wanted. And so these are about just the spiritual disciplines and our walk with God and the care of our soul. And so those books, John Mark Comer's book and anything by Dallas Willard, and John Ortberg, those two in particular, interpreting Dallas Willard, just really helpful in terms of growing our walk with God. And then another great author that I love to read is, I see you've Pete Greig up there, Dirty Glory. And that's just a wonderful book. It's just such a gripping story, and it's so well crafted and put together. And Pete Greig, great guy. I've met him a few times, and he's a great guy. Another good book of his is that How to Pray, based on the prayer course. It's just real solid stuff, but it's simple, it's solid, and yet it's spirit filled. I think that's the thing about Pete Greig.
That's great to hear. So many book selections there, and some great authors in there, Laurence. So it's great to hear the ones that you recommended there for our viewers, and they'll be all underneath the video and the links, any ones that we have in stock. So thanks very much, Laurence, and all the best, with the book launch next Wednesday. And if we can put details of that as well, and we'll have it on our social media. So if anyone wants to go to the book launch in Dublin, to go and support it. So yeah, I just want to thank all our viewers, our listeners. Please please subscribe, and put a comment in below if you have read any of the books that Laurence has recommended, or if you're going to buy his book as well. So all the best, Laurence, and
thanks John, and thank you for Teach Solas. You're doing a great job. It's great to have that Irish Christian book. I was going to say bookshop, but book distributor right here in Ireland. It's really good. I think this, Teach Solas and Praxis Press and things like this. It's a real sign of a confidence in the Irish church and in the Irish evangelical world. That we're not just the sort of the offspring of Britain or America, but it's great to have deepening roots here.
Yeah, definitely, and that was one of the reasons we started it. I think the Irish church is getting more confident in itself.
Yeah, I think that's what Praxis Press is about as well. Just giving a voice to mission thinking in Ireland for Ireland.
Perfect. That's great, Laurence. Right. Thanks for being on, and all the best. And we'll see the viewers next time.
Thanks a lot, John. God bless. Bye bye now.